I left the airport with a small bag and a big promise in my heart. 7 years from now, I would come back and everything would be different. I had a plan that was simple and stubborn. Work hard, send money home, build a life for my family. I was 30 years old when I boarded that first flight. I am 35 now, and I have become what I promised myself I would be. I am also a man who learned how to answer pain with a quiet, precise kind of fire. The first months were the hardest. Nights in a cheap room, the hum of another city's lights singing me awake, the loneliness like a second skin. I took 2-3 jobs when I could, whatever the contract offered. My hands hurt in new ways. My tongue learned new words. I felt everything twice. The misery of missing home and the promise that each dollar saved was a small ladder back to the life I wanted to climb into. I sent money every month. I sent it home with more than numbers attached. I sent faith. I sent letters, I sent plans. At home, the house was small at first, a place that held more dreams than square footage. I wrote to my wife every week. I told her about the job, about the man I was becoming. I told her that one day soon, she would not have to worry about rent and broken pipes and the way the winter made the roof groan. I told her about the car I imagined driving her in, about the room I would build for our children. I thought those letters stitched us together when I could not be there with my hands to fix things. Each year, I saved more. I learned the language of banks and contracts. I learned to listen to people who knew how to build things. I sent my wages home and watched, patient as a carpenter, as walls rose, as the roof found its place, as a car with a real engine sat in a driveway that used to be dust and weeds. I told myself every single day that this was for love. I told myself I was doing this for respect, for dignity, for a future that would not wobble on the shoulders of other people's generosity. When you are away for a long time, you learn to trust numbers more than faces. Numbers are steady. They do not change the story when you return. The money in the accounts grew. The property deeds listed my name as the one who paid. Friends sent photos of the house the day the paint looked new, slow videos of children running between rooms I had paid to make. I made a list of things I would say when I came back home. I imagined a small celebration, the neighbors clapping, my wife crying and hugging me like the ending of a long, hard movie. I imagined everything soft, thoughtful, just the way I had always pictured home. The flight home felt heavier than any I had taken before. My chest was tight with a strange, happy ache. My name flashed on the departure board as if it were trying to make up for the years the calendar had stolen. I walked through the arrival gate and expected the smell of familiar coffee, the small sun of our kitchen, the laugh that used to arrive like a little song. My stomach did flips of hope. I thought, finally I would sit at the table I had paid for. Finally I would feel the weight of my own life in my own hands. I did not see it at first. The house was the house. New paint, neat lawn, curtains my wife had chosen. But there was an unfamiliar distance when she smiled at me. She met me at the door, her hair pinned the way she used to pin it when we were newly married. The children ran, hopped up to my legs because they knew me by voice, by the rhythm of the things I would say. For a moment I stepped toward the life I had built in my head. Then I heard the sentence that split the air. "You have no share here," she said, soft and flat as a coin on a table. Time took a strange shape after that. The words repeated themselves over and over in my mind until it was like a small record stuck in an old machine. I expected anger. I expected shouting, tears, an explanation that would make this a mistake. Instead, there was a silence that felt deliberate, like the holding of a breath that intends to break you. She looked at me as if I was someone applying for permission to exist in a place I helped buy. I stood there, the suitcase still in my hand. I heard the neighbors through the wall like ghosts. My wife's brother, who had once smiled easily when I had left, now stood by her side, solid as a stone and just as immovable. He had always been in our life. He had always been a friend. The way he stood beside her that day felt like a decision with its own weight. I could see that they had made plans that did not include me. Plans drawn up in kitchen conversations while I lived in a room with a small heater and a big will. On that first night back, they left me with small, polite lies. They said nothing could be done at once, that we should talk in the morning, that we needed time to think. I wanted to shout. I wanted to show them the ledgers, the bank transfers, the emails that said I had paid for every brick and every plaster. I wanted to show them the receipts folded in a shoebox, each piece of paper a small witness to my years of labour. I held my tongue like a secret. I had learned patience, yet under that patience I had a steady private fire. The next day I woke early. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had no warmth in it. The house hummed with the quiet business of people who wanted to act as if everything was the same. I looked at my hands and thought of the hours they had worked, the fingers that had learned how to fix the small engines on construction equipment, and the big leaks in a landlord's plumbing. I thought of the nights I had held a small phone and whispered future plans like spells into the dark. I went to the bank. I showed them the proof they needed. I spoke to a lawyer who listened with a quiet, professional attention. I did not take their words personally. I had learned that law and money spoke in their own language. I felt coldly efficient, the way a surgeon must be efficient when the body needs saving. I transferred accounts into my name where the law allowed. I adjusted owners where the contracts and the signatures were mine by right. I sorted things out one paper at a time, and in that sorting I felt like someone reclaiming a farm out of lost fields. I moved quickly. I changed the locks on the house, the small, painful ritual of turning a key and closing the door against a past that would hurt me again. I took the car I had bought with my sweat, the vehicle that had once been a dream and then had become a practical thing that would carry me and my family. The ticket out of the country was the last act of that first day. I bought it with a steady hand and a face that was set. I left again because leaving had become the only way to measure what they had tried to make me feel. Small, invisible. People think revenge must be loud, a series of big acts and screams. But revenge is not always a shout. Sometimes it is a slow, quiet tightening of the space you give someone in your life until they disappear from the parts of you that matter. When I boarded the plane again, I was thinking about the calls that would come. I was thinking about what I would do when they finally understood how wrong they had been. She started to call a day later, the very first morning from the other side of the world. Her number lit my screen, and for a second everything in me wanted to answer. Her voice on the phone came soft and thin, like water in a cracked glass. She said words that were small apologies, a string of regrets like beads that rolled away when I reached for them. She asked why I had left things the way I did. She tried to pull at something in me that still wanted to fix things, to make the map smooth again. I listened. I let her speak, and I let the silence between her sentences be a mirror. I answered not with anger, but with clarity. I told her that I had made decisions to protect myself. I told her that when a person's loyalty does not hold in the face of pain, then it is not loyalty at all. I felt the years of my absence condensed into a single basin of meaning. I felt at that moment that the house I had built, the car I had bought, were proof not of my weakness, but of what I could make if I had to do it alone. Her calls came more and more. She would tell a story of missing me, of loneliness in the house that suddenly seemed too quiet without my presence. She would say she had made a mistake, that she did not understand how she had spoken those cruel words. She asked if I would send money, if I would help with the bills. She tried to weave herself back into my life with small practical requests, as if affection could be bought back one bill payment at a time. I did not ignore her out of cruelty. I answered because I was careful. I answered because I needed to see what her words looked like when they were not dressed in the safety of a neighbour's judgment. I watched her try to rebuild a bridge with little better than nails and hope. Each time she called, I felt a twist of something like justice, not the kind that burns people with fire and then walks away satisfied. The kind that is a mirror held up to someone's face until they cannot look past the damage they do with their decisions. Slow revenge is made of small decisions. I stopped giving to the things that had tied me to her. I closed accounts that I had once used to send money. I refused to be the safety net for a story that had excluded me. I let them feel what it is to stand on their own 2 feet when their choice had been to push me away. I did not become cruel. I became precise. I let their mistakes teach them the price of thoughtless speech. But money and law are not the only measures of a man's victory. I worked harder. I learned new trades, new markets, new ways to make my money useful. I sent it home sometimes, but only when the arrangement was honest and the respect in the conversation was real. I hired contractors who respected me and paid them fair wages. I found friends in the steady places of the world, men and women who had also been knocked around by life and had decided to stand back up again. There was a small pride in being a man who rose because he built, not because he begged. News travels in small towns like a rumor that becomes a book. People saw the way I left and then returned with a calm that had the sharp edge of a blade. They saw how I handled my affairs like a man who knew where every brick had come from. At the local cafe, the old men who had once nodded when I left now sat straighter in their chairs when I passed. They did not necessarily approve of me leaving again. They did not need to. They saw that I had taken back my life. That is a kind of fame that does not star on television but breeds a quiet respect. Respect is a currency I had earned in a harder way than any bank could measure. She called less as time went on. Sometimes the phone would ring and I would let it go to voicemail. Sometimes her voice would be there the next day, short and awkward. She would say she missed the children, that she had made mistakes out of fear or loneliness. I listened, and sometimes I sent money when it felt right and fair, but I refused to be a man who would be walked on again. I refused to let my kindness be a map for others to find a way to cross over me. There were nights, I will be honest, when the loneliness clawed back. Revenge, even the quiet kind, does not make you immune to pain. It simply gives you a way to move through it. I would sit by the window of my apartment in a city far away from the house I had built, watching lights blink and thinking about the small things that had once held me together. The way my wife used to make tea, the little joke my son made that always made me laugh. I missed those things in a way that did not disappear. But missing does not obligate you to return to the hands that push and wound. A year later, after the calls had become fewer and the house felt like a history lesson I had written myself, I received a letter. It came in an envelope that had been folded and refolded, the handwriting shaky like a bird trying to land. She wrote about regret. She wrote about nights she could not sleep and mornings where the silence in the house was too big. She wrote about how her brother, the man who had once stood so sure by her side, had shown himself less and less like a protector and more like a man who kept accounts of what he could control. She asked if we could meet, just once, to talk. I debated. A part of me wanted to be the man in the old stories who burst through the doors and demanded apologies like a verdict. Another part of me had learned that a closed door protects more than it locks. I chose to meet her in a public place, a small cafe with loud music and friendly servers, because I wanted neutrality, because I did not want anyone else's hands on the way this story ended. I wanted to see her face without the shield of a home she had rearranged. She arrived with smaller eyes and a heavier step. Time had smoothed some angles and sharpened others. She sat and looked at me like a stranger trying to recognize herself in an old photograph. Her apologies came in waves, soft and true and sometimes messy. She cried, and I felt for a second the old tenderness I had once felt when the world was only two of us. For a moment the world thought we might become that small, sacred thing again. I did not let myself believe it. I told her what her words had cost me. I told her how many lonely hours it had taken to build the walls she had tested. I told her about the nights in foreign rooms when I had dreamed of a different life, and the mornings I had waded into hard work to make that dream true. I spoke not to punish, but to explain. I wanted her to understand that the thing I had built was not merely money or house, but a boundary I had drawn around myself. I told her that I had forgiven her in ways that made sense to me, and forgiveness to me did not mean reopening the map where I had already drawn the lines. She reached out and touched my hand, a small, trembling thing. She asked if we could try again. She asked for time. She spoke of rebuilding like it was a light that had simply burned out and could be relit with the right match. I looked at her and thought of all the small matches I had collected in the 7 years away, the hopes, the promises, the careful letters. I had used most of them to set my own life on fire in a way that made sense. I did not want to waste the last ones on someone who had once used my absence to write me out of the story I paid to help write. When I stood to leave the cafe, people looked up from their cups and returned to their lives. The barista offered a smile, cushioned against the small public performance of our meeting. I walked away, feeling lighter, as if the air had shifted. Revenge had not been loud. It had been surgical. It had been the act of taking back what was rightful and then using what remained to build a life that did not bend beneath someone else's fickle weather. Years teach you many things. They teach you to read signs in the faces of people who have been careless with another's heart. They teach you to say no and mean it. They teach you that sometimes love should be a home that you both tend, not a trophy on a mantle one person polishes while the other starves. I have learned to keep a ledger in my head where trust is measured alongside bank accounts. I pay my debts and collect what is fair from those who have stood by me. I do not avenge with cruelty. I avenge by living well. People will tell you that revenge is a dark road that hollows the man who walks it. They imagine burning bridges and meaningless pyres. But I found a different pathway. I built a life with care, every brick set with intent. I let the people who betrayed me understand the consequence of their words. I did not gloat. I did not shout. I simply lived the life that I had promised myself on a long-ago flight. I remarried later, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I met a woman who matched the respect I gave and earned the trust I offered. We built something new together, a quieter life with steady mornings and small gestures of kindness. The love there was not the desperate glue of someone trying to hold a broken thing together. It was careful, mutual, clean. She knew the story of my past and did not try to edit it. She held an atlas of my scars without using them as a map. When my ex-wife's calls came again, and they did, now and then, as news travels fast about small-town misfortunes and sudden embarrassments, I listened with the tempered heart of a man who had seen the cycle and stepped out of it. I had no desire to be the villain in a tragedy she had written. I had no urge to punish. Her regrets were her own, and they landed where they would. I could be gentle without being weak. I could be firm without being cruel. There were moments I allowed myself a private satisfaction. When neighbors who had once whispered asked me for help with their own legal troubles, I gave it because I remembered how expensive silence could be.